We will begin with Marilyn Nelson, who was the Poet Laureate of Connecticut from 2001 to 2006 and has been a Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and Poet in Residence of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. She's also been awarded the Frost Medal, the NSK Neustadt Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Award, and the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize. So Marilyn, what text has been on your mind lately that you're going to be sharing with us?
Well, one of my favorite poets is Robert Hayden, and this poem comes back to me often for lots of different reasons, but during this pandemic time, I've been particularly looking for messages of hope and positivity and love, and that's what I find in many of Hayden's poems. And I'm going to read a poem about, it's based on the journal of an extraterrestrial visitor to the United States. I'm reading an abridged version of it. It's called American Journal, and I'm reading about half of it. Here among them, the Americans, this baffling multi-people, extremes and variegations, their noise, restlessness, their almost frightening energy. How best describe these aliens in my reports to the counselors? Disguise myself in order to study them unobserved, adapting their varied pigmentations, white, black, red, brown, yellow, the imprecise and strangering distinctions by which they live, by which they justify their cruelties to one another. Something they call the American dream. Sure, we still believe in it, I guess, an earthman in the tavern said. Irregardless of the sometimes nightmare facts we always try to double talk our way around. And it's okay. The dream's okay. That means what's good could be a damn sight better. Means everybody in the good old USA should have the chance to get ahead, or at least should have 3 squares a day. As for myself, I do okay, not crying hunger with a loaf of bread tucked under my arm, you understand. I fear one does not clearly follow, I replied. Notice you got a funny accent, pal. Like where you from? He asked. Far from here, I mumbled. He stared hard. I left. Must be more careful. Item, learn to use okay. Their password, okay. Crowds gathering in the streets today for some reason obscure to me. Noise and violent motion. Sentinels, pigs I heard them called, with flailing clubs, rage and bleeding and frenzy and screaming, machines wailing, unbearable decibels. I fled, lest vibrations of the brutal scene do further harm to my metabolism already overtaxed. The counselors would never permit such barbarous confusion. We are an ancient race and have outgrown illusions cherished here. Item, their vaunted liberty. Nobody pushes me around, I have heard them say. Land of the free, they sing. What do they fear, mistrust, betray more than the freedom they boast of in their ignorant pride? Have seen the squalid ghettos in their violent cities, paradox on paradox. How have the Americans managed to survive? Though I have easily passed for an American in banker's gray, afro and dashiki, long hair and jeans, hard hat, yarmulke, miniskirt, something eludes me, some constant amid the variables, defies analysis and imitation. Confess, I am curiously drawn to the Americans. Doubt I could exist among them for long, however. Psychic demands far too severe, much violence, much that repels, I am attracted nonetheless. Their variousness, their ingenuity, their élan vital, and that something, essence, quiddity, I cannot penetrate or name. Robert Hayden, American Journal.
Thank you. This has been a time where it often feels like we are venturing forth into an alien world. So to hear it reflected back in that way is really striking. What drew you to that poem in the first place, do you think?
Well, there are lots of voices in it. I only read a couple of them. There are lots of Americans who appear in it, and I think he's done, who was it, Charles Kuralt, who did a road trip across America and interviewed people. Some people will be too young to remember that. But it in some ways, it's a portrait of the country by portraying different voices. And it's very perceptive about America, what we are, who we have become. And in spite of the accuracy of the vision, there is also a great, I think, deep kindness in his portrait of America.
Well, we're all trying to see with new eyes now. So thank you for sharing that piece. Our next poet up is Alondra Bobadilla, who was born and raised in Boston. Her love for writing emerged when she first learned her letters as a young child. In addition to her writing, she has participated in multiple forms of performance art, finding different ways to express herself beyond poetry. She is currently a student at Fenway High School and was named Boston's first ever Youth Poet Laureate in January 2020. Alondra, what are you reading for us tonight?
Hi all, it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to be reading a brief poem by Nikita Gill. She is what people call on the internet an Insta poet. So someone who they post their poetry on Instagram and other social media platforms. And the entire point of these Insta poets is to make poetry more accessible. It's very simplistic, it's very straightforward. And I chose this specific poem because it's popped up to me a couple of times, and it's called On Raising Children in a Crumbling World. I will read. You cannot protect children by lying to them. You cannot craft castles from the sky and tell them this is what they are walking into. Press the bones of fairy tales into their minds and hope for the best when reality is more like an episode of The Walking Dead. Politicians, instead of zombies, here to eat through us all with their appalling policies. There is no way to hide a cannibalistic world from innocent eyes. And believe me, I have tried. I have tried to read them stories of sleeping princesses and flying carpets, give them poetry, but life is now perpetually prosaic. I know now that to protect them is to tell them truths, speak of the lives and evil out there, but also teach them inside them lies a warrior made of exactitude. Mother has many avatars, but in this particular era, she becomes sensei too. Raising children to strengthen themselves from the inside by teaching them they can defeat their fears by facing all their worst wounds. I read somewhere once, the society that cannot protect its children cannot protect its own future and is destined to die. It is a hard thing to raise a child with hope, but with authenticity, with imagination, yet with veracity, on a planet that is slowly beginning to sound less like Earth and more like a war cry.
Thank you. I love that you chose this poem written in the voice of a mother. How were you thinking about this as a young person?
So I chose the poem because I have a lot of younger siblings, and I've worked with younger kids for a long time, whether by babysitting when I was 10 to working in like children's programs. And when I stumbled upon this poem, I was very much impacted, first of all, because it reminded me a lot of what we're going through now. And I feel like with children, transparency is so important. And I think oftentimes if there is, from the perspective of a daughter, if there's a mistake that parents make is they make themselves out to be even themselves as well as the world, a little bit like a fairy tale. And I think it's to protect the child. And I think that's why they do these little rituals and these stories, even of things that they see in front of them, to try to simplify something that I think children probably capture a lot faster than maybe a teenager or an adult can. And I think if anything, when a child grows older, they get frustrated from the moment that they feel like, or they realize that what was told to them growing up was a lie. So I chose it because of that transparency and the fact that it encouraged that transparency coming from the perspective of a mom, which usually I feel like parents might be a bit hesitant to be so honest with a child because they rather maybe sometimes cover the truth than to find a simple way of explaining something so complicated.
Mm. And it's interesting to think of the role that that art plays in both telling truths and creating a vision of a different world that is not the one that we have to live in. Thank you. We're going to turn now to Alicia, the first of two Alicias, Alicia Ostriker, a poet, scholar, and critic who writes Jewish feminist poetry. She has been called America's most fiercely honest poet by Progressive. She was also one of the first women poets in America to write and publish poems discussing the topic of motherhood. In 2015, she was elected a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, and in 2018, she was named the New York State Poet Laureate. Alicia, what do you have for us tonight?
I wanted to read something by a Black woman poet because there's a whole congregation of Black women poets who have been so important to my own writing, my own development, through their power and their courage. A poet I turn to all the time is Lucille Clifton, who is, I see some nodding.
Okay.
Lucille is deceptively simple. She writes short poems that are a little like hand grenades. They explode on impact. I'm going to read two short poems which both express joy and triumph, celebration, and both of them, if you listen, have a note, an undertone of deep sorrow over which they are triumphing, peacefully triumphing, I might add. They're both triumphant poems. And they are models of how to triumph in many ways over what appears to want to prevent you from becoming who you are meant to be. So this first one is called Homage to My Hips. And I should say, my students, all my students love Lucille Clifton. Homage to my hips. These hips are big hips. They need space to move around in. They don't fit into little petty places. These hips are free hips. They don't like to be held back. These hips have never been enslaved. They go where they want to go. They do what they want to do. These hips are mighty hips. These hips are magic hips. I have known them to put a spell on a man and spin him like a top. So that's one poem. Rather early in Lucille's career, or early middle age. And this one is late in her career. Won't you celebrate with me? won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay. My one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
I'm also a big Lucille Clifton fan, and I'm struck by how embodied these poems are. I mean, so many of her poems, but joyous, and as you said, with an undercurrent, but so deeply rooted in the body and the experience of the body and physicality.
Right, which is itself a form of defiance, because women's bodies were supposed to be what men looked at, what men admired, and what men could do what they wanted with. And to write from the center of a woman's body, unafraid, is defiance and triumph. And Lucille did this all her life, fearlessly, while writing these poems that feel so simple, so small, so delicate, and are so strong.
Yeah. Thank you. We are now lucky to hear some music from Alicia Jo Rabins, who is an award-winning writer, musician, performer, and teacher of Torah, as well as the author of 2 poetry books, Divinity School and Fruit Geode. Some of her music or performance projects include Girls in Trouble, which is an indie folk song cycle about women in Torah, and it has a wonderful curriculum that goes with it, which we're lucky to have some small parts of at JWA. And the forthcoming independent feature film, A Kaddish for Bernie Madoff. Alicia.
All right, so I wanted to play a song by the band Magnetic Fields. It's from an album that came out in 1999, and it's called The Book of Love. And I love to think of this song in conversation with religious traditions and all the different holy books that we are in conversation with, and all the different ways of loving and kind of making them new that we all take part of in all of our traditions. So here's Magnetic Fields, The Book of Love. The book of love is long and boring. No one can lift the damn thing. It's full of charts and facts and figures and instructions for dancing. But I love it when you read to me, and you can read me anything. The book of love has music in it. In fact, that's where music comes from. Some of it is just transcendental. Some of it is just really dumb. But I love it when you sing to me, and you can sing me anything. heart-shaped boxes, and things were all too young to know. But I love it when you give me things, and you ought to give me wedding rings. Yes, I love it when you give me things, and you ought to give me wedding rings. Judith, you're muted.
Sorry about that. That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Alicia. And I love the idea of the book as something that needs to be read to one another, right? That it's not just an individual piece, something that you immerse yourself in, but a collective dipping into, and something that we need to hear in each other's voices, which I think is so much of what we're doing tonight. And what I so appreciate is being able to hear different pieces of work and different voices read to one another. It lands differently when it's off the page. So we're going to turn now to your own writing, now that we've warmed up a little bit by sharing some of the pieces that have been bringing you inspiration or comfort or grounding in these recent weeks. And we're going to start this time with Alicia Ostreicher, reading Children's Blood.
Okay. What I want to say about this poem is that in times of crisis and suffering, we often feel as if what we're living through is unique, that nothing else ever like this existed, that nothing outside the moment can really speak to how hard it is for us, and poetry can remind us that for good or bad, what we are experiencing in our time and place has been experienced in other times and other places and other people. And sometimes it's important to deal with just how bad it can be. This poem is called Children's Blood, and it uses an epigraph from the great Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. The epigraph says, "And through the streets, the blood of children ran simply like children's blood. And through the streets, the dollars flowed simply like dollars flowing upward from the poor to the rich. And through the streets, the bullets flew joyously like bullets flying straight toward living flesh. And through the skies, the drones navigated smoothly, like drones dreaming in the next life they will be chickadees. And at his console, the lieutenant touched a button patriotically, like a lieutenant who will soon be promoted to captain. And in the classroom, some boys joked about death, like boys who never guess beforehand how death will pant hotly in their faces. And around the skirt of the house, under the shingles, termites were building mud towns. And through the streets, the blood of children ran simply, like children's blood, for many, many centuries.
Mm.
So that's a poem written in sorrow and anger, but also to remind me that we're not alone. This is human society over the ages. But then again, here's a poem, the first poem I wrote when we moved from Princeton, New Jersey, where we had lived for 50 years, to New York City, where my husband and I both grew up. So we were returning. And this is August Morning, Upper Broadway. As the body of the beloved is a window through which we behold the blackness and vastness of space pulsing with stars. And as the man on the corner with his fruit stand is a window, and the cherries, blackberries, raspberries, avocados, and carrots are a rose window, like the one in Chartres, yes, or the one in Paris, through which light floods from the other world, the pure one, stabbing tourists with malicious, abundant joy. Though the man is tired in the summer heat and reads his newspaper listlessly without passion, and people pass his stand buying nothing, let us call this scene a window looking out, not at a paradise, but as a paradise might be if we had eyes to see the women in their swaying dresses, the season's fruit, the babies in their strollers, infinitely soft. Clear window after clear window. So I walk those streets in my neighborhood all the time to remind myself of how much life there is and how much spirit is inhabiting and coming through all the faces and the bodies of the people I see.
Thank you. I think, yes, feeling that the humanity that pulses in everything that we see is, especially now when so many of us are so isolated from people, to be able to feel that coming through in your words is very powerful. Thank you. We're gonna I'm gonna keep my comments very, very short through all of this, because I really want to leave time for some interchange among the poets and also among all of you in the audience. So we're gonna move on to Marilyn. Marilyn, can you turn your video back on?
Okay,
Thank you. Wonderful.
Alicia, terrific, thank you. And Alicia's, thank you for sharing, for what you've shared. I'm really sitting here awed. So I should just read.
Yeah.
I haven't thanked Alicia Ostriker for handing me this poem. It came out of a conversation we had in email. It's an experience I had in the fall of 1968. And I think I was in my first year of graduate school in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. And this was in October of 1968. It's called Pigeon and Hawk. A new grad student far away from home, I took every step on trembling ground. I knew no one, who were my friends. The other Black student in the program ducked and rushed away when our eyes met. Seminar rooms were full of hungry dogs snapping up scraps of nodding approval. At the end of a campus reception, I accepted the offer of a ride from campus to my downtown room with bath. October. Evenings were getting cool. The walk over the bridge downtown felt dangerously long when it was dark. Did the young man who offered me a ride tell me his name? What was it about him that made me say, yes, thanks, like a damn fool? When we were in his car and he said, oops, he had forgotten something at his place he had to pick up, and asked if I'd mind if we stopped there. Why did I say, okay? Did we talk during the drive? Was the radio on? Did I just watch the businesses in thinning traffic become a suburb where his apartment complex was in a woods already splendid in autumn colors, so beautiful they took my words away? When he pulled up and said I should come in, it would only take a minute. Why did I go upstairs with him, wait as the key unlocked his apartment, and go inside? The building was silent. A big window in the living room looked at parking lots with a few parked cars and the glowing trees. He said, I'll be right back, and disappeared into the bedroom. I turned to the view, thinking of nothing, my mind a blank page that grew emptier as the minutes passed. What was he doing during those minutes as I stood dreaming like a fat pigeon in the keen purview of a circling hawk? What could he have needed to go home for that was so important he had to go there first before he drove me home? Was he wrestling with opportunity? Human horrors are not inevitable. Some people stop themselves before they cross moral divides. A drinking buddy might say, cool it, bro. A cop might take his knee off a Black man's throat. A young man might come out and say, okay, let's go, and drive you home. What was his name?
Wow.
Thank you, Alicia.
You're very welcome, but you wrote it, not me.
I had forgotten it, though.
It's amazing what we can forget. But the thing to remember, I think, is that human horrors are not inevitable. I love that line. Yeah. And I feel like we need to hold it up in front of us every day.
I think so, too. I mean, that's what it says to me. As I said, I'm looking for statements of hope and statements of faith that we are not as wicked as we seem sometimes, most of the time actually, to be, but that there is something that's still available inside of us that can stop us from committing atrocities.
But also all the questions in your poem, I think also to me are so, they really resonate with all the ways, first of all, that women sort of take on responsibility and ask questions about things that are not our fault, but also how we try to make sense of things and how we try to remember them in some way that makes it more bearable.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not a
wonderful
much
poem.
verbal person.
It's a wonderful poem about how your innocence, the innocence of the girl in the poem who you were, how the innocence of that girl kind of rubbed off on him and made him more innocent than he intended to be.
Maybe so. For me, it's still, there are many more questions to be asked.
But that's what I was feeling.
Yeah.
That somehow or other, this innocence permeated a person who intended to do harm.
Mm. 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 If we could only protect, if all vulnerable people could only protect themselves by being innocent, wow, that would help the world a lot, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It sure would. Well, something turned him. Something changed him.
Yeah. Maybe there was something in the bedroom. Maybe he had to feed his fish or something.
Alicia, I'm going to turn to you now for your piece written in this very moment.
Yeah, so this is one of a series of poems I've been writing since pandemic times, and this is called On Breathing. I'm okay during the day, but at night I get scared, which makes it hard to breathe, which is a symptom of the pandemic, which is what scares me. Well played, anxiety, my old friend. You've always warned me something like this might happen. You're a gift from my ancestors who survived plagues and worse. They wove you into my DNA to warn me so that I too might survive. Now that it's happening, anxiety, I don't need you anymore. I need the ones who gave you to me. Hear me, ancestors who lived through danger times. I'm ready for you now. All these years I've carried your worries in my bones. Now I need your love, your 1,000-year view. Tell me it's going to be okay. Remind me you made it through, and we will too. Teach me to breathe.
And you wrote that, I know this because we did an event together in April. You wrote that before we were all thinking about what it means to breathe or not be able to breathe in the context of George Floyd rather than the context of respiratory illness. And it takes on a whole new resonance in that context as well.
Yes, this poem was from mid-March, late March, exactly, yeah. And I mean, like Alicia, actually first I didn't say before how honored I am to be part of this and how everyone's words are moving me so profoundly and deeply. So I just wanted to say that. And like Alicia said, I also think a lot about how isolating it can feel to be going through a moment, whether personally or socially, you know, societally, or both, that feels unprecedented. And people are always kind of tossing that word around, unprecedented. And it helps me to contextualize it and think about all of the moments that our ancestors, in order for us to be here, something has survived so many of these unprecedented, you know, challenges, large and small, societal and personal. And so gathering strength from that sense of what does survive and what does last, and the resilience that we carry inside us has been helping me in this time.
Right, and to think about the things that are, I love the idea of thinking about the things that are handed down, looking for the strong people behind it, as opposed to the the inherited traits, which may work against us at times. But to pull for that piece of it, when so much of the time, I think when we think about inheritance, we forget about the individual stories of the people. You know, we think about the things that are sort of disembodied in some way. So I love trying to return that piece to it as well. It speaks to me as a historian, certainly. Alondra, I want to call on you now to not quite bring us home, because we have a ways left to go, but to bring your piece into your voice into this again.
Hi all, again. I want to start off by saying that I am so in awe right now of everything that has been read and the music. I'm just like, I don't know. I don't get emotional too fast, but I'm really emotional right now in this moment. So the poem I'm going to be reading was the poem that I actually wrote for the PsalmSeason project based on Psalms 133. I don't remember if I had a title for this because I never actually wrote it down. And typically I don't really use like titles for my poems. I just don't know how to write titles. I'm just not good at it. I'm not good at summarizing as it is. So I sort of just let them speak for themselves. But again, it's based off of Psalms 133, which is a psalm that has to do with community. If community was a gold chain, it would be 24 carats laid gently upon elegant collarbones, grazing the skin as stallions graze fields. The treasure of the orphan, once abandoned, now redeemed by a people not their own. Community says, my mother is your mother, my father is your own. Nurse at her breast, be cradled in her arms. For my cousins are your kin, my brothers your shield. Si la comunidad era armadura, será la armadura de Dios. Armadura de protección celestial. Soldados son el pueblo, equipados para guerrear. If one falls, don't the 99 rush to his side? Incline his head to the heartbeat, a baby to the motherland's chest. Does not community nurture the ill of heart back to good health? If community could be evidence to the existence of God, would it not be the clearest? For didn't his presence pass through Abraham's offering, the seal of a covenant for generations? Does his spirit not pass through people like he passed through those carcasses? Does he not pass over dead things and breathe them to living? Is not community an oversized family taking in the loveless? Is not love the cure to our demons? As we are apart, let us not doubt the power of the people, for 3 is better than 1, and thousands are a watchtower, a wall of heavenly stones. Through screens we pray, we laugh, we weep, though we do not touch. Is community not 10 times stronger in adversity than they are in peace? For the people were made for a time such as this, a time where the overlap of different peoples would be necessary to live. A time where the test of unity is fire blazing against skin. A time where the people, stranger or kin, must huddle under the storm till it passes, for no other choice stands but this.
Thank you. I love hearing some of the images and words of the psalm peek through your words too. It's incredible to hear the mix of your voices and the text that you have all chosen. We've heard so many different tones here, right? There's warnings, there's pleas, advice, prayer, anger, hope, community. I would love to hear a little bit what you take from one another's pieces, what strikes you, where you see pieces speaking to one another.
Well, I want to say thank you to Alicia Jo, and thank you to Marilyn, and thank you to Alondra for your presence and your authenticity of language and making beauty out of what could be bitterness. And Alondra, I just want to say, you have written a poem about what America so painfully lacks most of the time. Dreams of, maybe, but so painfully lacks, because we have now all been taught to be individuals and care only about ourselves and not about everybody else. And your poem reminds us how much, how deeply all our spirits yearn for the kind of community that this poem is yearning for. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all. That was so, I appreciate that a lot.
There was a line that struck me as if it had been in neon in your poem, Alondra, and it was something about a too large family that makes room for, I can't remember the line, but I was very much struck by the sense that that is truly what community is, that you make room for the stranger, you move over, you offer your hospitality. I don't know if you can repeat the line. I would love to hear it again.
Yes, the line is not community an oversized family taking in the loveless?
Wonderful.
I think that's the one you're referring to.
Yeah, it is. Wonderful line. Just really true. Telling. Yeah.
I love the conversation, and I love that that the arc led to Alondra's poem, because I think it so beautifully contains this conversation that I think, you know, we're all having in our poetry and in our lives, and it's an essential human conversation about the intimate, and then, you know, kind of being rooted in the self, and the self's being, you know, the authentic self, and showing up and being present, which means being attuned to what's happening inside of us and being honest about it, but also being focused outward and connecting with each other and looking beyond our little microcosm. And I think, yeah, I love the way that all of these poems are kind of talking about that in these encounters, sometimes between individual characters and sometimes between, you know, ancestors and, you know, like Pablo Neruda and Alicia's idea of these generations of ongoing sagas that really are always experienced through the eye of the individual. It's each of us in the end we're the sensors that take in the world, SENSORS kind of sensors. And then I think it all leads to this beautiful, profound, challenging question of how to open our hearts to each other and build a society where that's part of what happens regularly.
Mm-hmm. In your poem, Alicia Jo, I kept nodding inwardly as you read your poem, because the sense that being able to look back at ancestors who have moved us forward against the most incredible odds is such a source of strength. It's such a comfort to be able to look back and say, thank you for showing me that I can do this. There's a Langston Hughes poem in which an old African-American woman says, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. And then she just describes what it's been like to go up this stairway, which is, you know, splinters and places where the boards are missing. And she says several times that it's no crystal stair. It really helps to be able to look at people who've climbed that, before us. I thank you for that. Showing us that again, teaching us that again.
I love the line also from Alondra from your piece, "For the people were made for a time as this," which I think is just such an affirmation. I think we spend so much time in difficult times saying sort of what you were referring to, Alicia, that, that we keep repeating, like, this is unprecedented, we don't know how to cope. And I think that reframe of just saying, actually, no, we're made to cope with things like this, even if we haven't experienced them before. That we have resources, internal resources and communal resources and historical resources, and it is in fact our duty to rise to it. And not that means to cover it up, but to figure out how do we both acknowledge the things that are just horror filled and shocking. And I think we heard some of those juxtapositions in each of your pieces, the pieces that just we cannot make sense of, and yet to take that as the challenge to find the beauty and the hope and the belief that we can face it with strength. To me, it's just such an important reframe.
If there's something that I wanted to add on to what Alicia Jo said, just because there's two of you, when you were talking about how all the poems were sort of in conversation with each other, in the sense that they kind of all sort of talked about these same different aspects of, I can't exactly quote the exact words you used, but it made me think of just the different aspects of human nature, right? And the different occurrences. So whether it is, the repetition of the things that always happen that Alicia was talking about, or the familiarity of being in an area that you know so well that is comforting to you, or when, your poem about anxiety, and then the fact that you find comfort in the fact that ancestors already struggled through that same pain, while Marilyn spoke of what could have been an almost negative situation, right? In a world that is usually not almost, it's very all in and worse than what we anticipate. And it's so interesting because they're all very different poems, but they sort of all talk about the dynamics of, I guess, what it is to be human, what it is to live as a collective, as well as what it is to be within yourself, whether it is the questions and, the imagery of seeing the things that are around you, or just that idea of how people work and function and live together. And I feel like during this time period, and during any time period, because I feel like human beings are so inclined to only, sit and think and be profound when, everything is going down the drain. That's like when the quote that goes, and I hate this quote so much because it's true, you don't know what you have until it's gone. I feel like, why do we do that to ourselves? Like, we do it to ourselves. So we only sat here, and this is why I love writing, and I love writers and artists, because they do the profound every single day, every day. That's what they do, because they're just like, I got to take all out of life and write it all down or dance it all out. Like, I can't lose a moment. And stuff like this program is such a blessing to me, because it's so important, to come together and to have these moments. And I just hope that so many more people, after all of this, is over, or whatever else comes, that people choose to live their lives in such a way that they are constantly thinking about, the depth of their existence and of our collective existence, and seeing the beauty as well as the wickedness in that, and trying to be intentional about how they live.
Very good.
I think I love what you just said, and how much poetry can remind us of what is possible, what may not have happened yet, but what can happen, what might happen. And how I think all of these poems, Alicia Jo talking talking about the survival of ancestors, there is a sense in what you all wrote that that there's something sacred in every human being that can be passed along, that isn't just in them, but can be manifested in what they do and in the world.
I think also that it's tempting to believe when you're faced with a society that seems to be melting like the Wicked Witch of the West. It's tempting to believe that this is the truth about being human, that you scratch the surface and you find something truly ugly and horrible. But I think it's important to recognize that it's possible that the truer truth about our existence is that under the surface of ugliness is the possibility of kindness and beauty and poetry and song, and that may be the truer vision of who we are as human beings. And doesn't that make you feel better? I mean, it gives you courage to go on believing that that's who we are, not the Klan burning crosses on yards, but the other people, the people who are standing there saying, "Excuse me, officer, but what you're doing might not be right, and I don't want to get involved too much, but excuse me, officer, maybe you need to get off that man's neck." That's the hope, that's who we are.
And I think, Marilyn, the way that your poem took that kind of huge ethical, tremendous question and hope and vision and condensed it into this amazing journey that we all got to go on, and in this sort of frictionless way where we were so involved in the narrative and so worried for the speaker, and then to kind of deliver us at this possibility of people choosing to show up and choosing to do the right thing. I think it's such a testament to you as a poet and to the power of poetry, like the gift of poetry that we all get to work with as poets, to take these ideas that are almost too big to hold in our minds and put them on this little page and say, "Here, have it. Come with me."
So before I take some questions from the audience, I want to invite Alicia to play another song for us, to put a little musical container on some of this conversation.
Okay, so I, in honor of the whole PsalmSeason kind of project that's been happening of people interpreting the Psalms, this is a song I wrote interpreting or sort of retelling a poem from the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 31, which is a bit of an ode to this very strong and powerful woman. And I always like to say there's a very important feminist critique of this poem, which is that she's doing everything. She's doing all the labor. It's kind of a problem. And the flip side of that is that it is admiring and naming all of the things that she's doing, not just domestic, but business and agriculture. So this is the positive positive reading of that poem. And so I took an American folk song and kind of did a mashup with my own little translation. So this is after Proverbs 31, and it's called Rubies. Like a merchant ship, strong and wide, golden oranges deep more than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. With purple silk and tapestry, she weaves a blanket to cover me. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. The world is woven through us, and I cannot forget how her fingers hold the thread. She buys a field, she plants a vine. Come the autumn, she makes her wine. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. Let it rain or let it storm, she keeps her baby safe and warm. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. The world is woven through us, and I cannot forget how her fingers hold the thread. Grace can lie and beauty's vain. Oh, but she calls me by my name. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. The world is woven through us. I swear I won't forget how her fingers hold the thread.
Thank you so much. I love that piece so much. It really, I have to say I was not a fan of A Woman of Valor until I heard that song, and it really reimagined it for me, and it's so beautiful. So thank you for sharing that interpretation with us. We have a few questions. I think we have probably time for one. And one of the questions that we got was about what it's been like to write through this time. Has your writing changed? Has your, what is it like to be a poet in this pandemic?
Well, I will take the leap and say that I'm not writing poems at all. I keep thinking about what the world will be and how to project something into the world which I can't imagine yet. We used to sit and think, well, in August I'll do this, and in September I'll do that, I'll publish this, I'll send this off, but now I just can't imagine. So I haven't been writing poems for this 3 or 4 months. I've been translating and enjoying. That's another use of the creative brain, I suppose, but I haven't been able to generate anything at all of my own.
Well, now you make me less ashamed than I was, because I haven't been able to write any poetry either.
Yeah.
It's as if all that through the time. And what I have been doing is writing to friends more than I ever did, having long conversations, long email conversations with friends about everything that is going on in our individual lives and in the country and in the world. And the other thing that I'm doing is writing postcards to get out the vote.
Yes, I'm doing that too.
A neighbor of mine produces address lists in Texas or in North Carolina, and I get the postcards and instructions, and that's what I write. I write these addresses and a little message.
Yes.
Well, it's kind of hard in a way not to write, just from the perspective, well, I just started my position, so there's been a lot of online events, and I guess in that respect, I kind of have to write for some of them, because if I don't have poetry already, but minus the job, and I guess the idea of having to, if there was one thing that I told myself that when all of this began, was that I wasn't going to allow this to take away something I used to grieve, something I've always used to grieve. Like, my writing was for me before it was for anyone else. And when it became for other people, oftentimes I shared it when I didn't want to. Oftentimes I wrote when I didn't want to. So I just felt like I'm not going to let this huge, even though it's big and it hurts a lot, you know, my writing for me is the only outlet I have. And for many people that I know, it's their only outlet. And hearing someone else's words is also a lot of people's only outlet, whether that's through music or something else. And I just felt like the same way I owe it to myself to continue to use that as my method of grieving, I also owe it to those that have always really enjoyed listening to my work and finding some comfort in that, the same way that I find comfort in my mother singing. Like that for me, I continue for myself and for them. But it is hard. It is hard because you look outside and you're just like, it's suffocating. But I think I've come to the point where I can finally breathe again. And part of that is because I have been doing these different things and being in spaces where I feel like the people around me give me that breath. And just being around family and friends. Yes, socially distanced, because that's the only thing people care about hearing anymore. Yes, socially distanced. We hang out. It's not a crime. As long as you are 6 feet away, you're okay. And allowing them to give me back some of that life that I feel like all of this craziness took away.
I have been writing in the bathtub, which I've never done before. And that to me is like this, because I have both of those impulses, and there are weeks when I can't write at all. And then it's actually kind of restored me. I love, hearing you speak, Alondra, about this, just poetry as the vehicle for being able to deal with life, which I really, if I heard correctly, I mean, I relate to it in that way. And there are times when I feel too overwhelmed by life to even access that. Sort of like meditations, like the more you need it, the harder it is to actually sit down and do it sometimes. But there are also moments I find right now when I feel a little bit restored to like a pure kind of relationship with poetry, where I'm not thinking about anything except for like, get me through this moment, kind of help me let go of the day, help me make sense of this, or at least name it so that I can put it off to the side so it doesn't have to be my entire reality. And for some reason, taking a really hot bath, which I think kind of knocks me out a little bit, which helps, with candles. And, it's this kind of sacred space in my life. And I fortunately have a fairly waterproof phone, and I literally am like typing on my phone. And that's the way I can write for the last 3 months.
New opportunities for creativity that emerge out of moments of crisis.
If it works.
Exactly. But I think it gets back to that idea that you were all talking about before about how essential poetry is, that it's like the, you know, that the making of art is the most kind of core impulse. And I think about Audre Lorde, poetry is not a luxury. I come back to that text again and again, and just thinking about how much we need poetry, which sometimes gets misunderstood as like the most fanciful of arts, as opposed to the most kind of burned down to its absolute essence kind of art. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the four of you for sharing just so beautifully and fully of yourselves, for sharing your voices and your words and being in conversation with one another tonight. This was such a gift to all of us. It was such an honor for me to be able to be part of this event. Thank you for restoring so much spirit and hope and joy and hard questions to all of us. All four of these women are featured in PsalmSeason. I urge you to check out the larger project for more of these kinds of beautiful reflections. The link will be in the chat. If you missed the PsalmSeason kickoff concert, you can find it on YouTube, and that will be in the chat as well. It was a tremendous concert of people from around the world and all different kinds of performances. There's so much richness in this project, and it's been such a balm for so many people to be able to access this material. I also want to let you know that the Jewish Women's Archive holds quarantine-ish book talks on Thursday nights at 8 p.m., and I invite you all to join us. This Thursday, we have Natasha Diaz talking about her novel, Color Me In, which is a coming-of-age story of a biracial Jewish girl. And I'm looking forward to being in conversation with her Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And the link for registering for that should be in the chat as well. So again, thank you all so much. Be well, stay safe, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Judith. It was an honor.
Thank you.
It was an honor. Thank you.
Truly an honor for me.
Pleasure meeting and hearing you all. Just wonderful.
Thank you.